Well, good afternoon, everyone, and happy Election Day. Thank you so much for the chance to gather here at the Ohio State House and talk about how things are going in Ohio. First, to look back to the spring. As you remember, way back in March and April, we started to roll up our sleeves and figure out how are we going to run a presidential election in the midst of a pandemic. Obviously, this is a historic election, one unlike anything we've ever seen, and we keyed in on a few key priorities, really from the very beginning. One was recruiting massive numbers of poll workers. We knew that we needed to launch an unprecedented poll worker recruitment effort that has been enormously successful. As you know, we've recruited and trained over 56,000 poll workers who were standing ready this morning at 6:30 a.m. to open close to 4,000 polling locations all throughout the state. This may be the year that we recruited that new generation of poll workers. Maybe a silver lining from this experience is that this great and energetic new group of poll workers that we were able to bring into this important civic process. Of course, one of the other things that we focused on from the very beginning is the health and safety priorities that needed to be put in place. As you all know, we worked with the CDC and the Ohio Department of Health, listening to those professionals, scientists, doctors, and epidemiologists that guided us as we created a 61-point checklist. A 61-point checklist that was employed today at every polling location throughout the state and all throughout the last month at all of our early voting sites. Along with that 61-point health and safety checklist was the fielding of massive quantities of personal protective equipment. As you know, many Ohio companies stepped up and donated hand sanitizer and masks. We used our CARES dollars to purchase the remaining needed quantities of that, and every polling location throughout the state is stocked today with the equipment that they need. Of course, one of the other priorities was combating disinformation, making sure that Ohioans had reliable and accurate information. That's been another success, and we can point to some success stories there where we've been able to track down and bring to justice a group of individuals that were engaging in a pernicious act of disinformation. Of course, this is something that we remain constantly vigilant about, but happy to report that we're not seeing any major incidents of that today throughout Ohio. But again, we remain constantly on the watch for it. And then, of course, maximizing early and absentee voting was one of our other top priorities. I think it's safe to say that you can call this nothing other than a resounding success when we had 3.4 million ballots that had already been cast before the polls even opened this morning at 6:30 a.m. 3.4 million Ohioans who had already voted. This is by far a record-breaking participation rate for early and absentee voting, and something that we were very happy to see, something that we really started off from the very beginning working to encourage. As you know, not only with a lot of public information campaigns that we did to spread the word about the convenience of early and absentee voting, but also with mailing out an absentee ballot request to all 8 million registered voters in the state. And by the way, that's another one. The fact that we surpassed 8 million registered voters in the state of Ohio is another big success story. Of course, all of this preparation culminated in this morning when the polls opened all throughout Ohio, close to 4,000 locations opening up at 6:30 a.m. And I'm happy to report that as we stand here today, Election Day in Ohio is going smoothly so far. Of course, as with any election, when you've got that many polling locations in a big, diverse state like Ohio, there are going to be a few things here and there. And we've experienced throughout the day, and starting from early this morning, a couple little bumps in the road that we've been able to work through with our county boards of elections. And thankfully, because of having the right contingency plans in place, again, happy to report that things are going smoothly. As many of you know, this morning at 5:36 a.m., we were notified by the Franklin County Board of Elections that they were experiencing problems uploading voter data into their electronic poll books. Of course, that's a process that goes on overnight. When the early voting stops at 2 p.m. yesterday, then the task begins of loading that data into those electronic poll books. The decision was made by the Franklin County Board of Elections at 5:36 this morning that they couldn't wait any longer for that upload to continue, and they decided to switch over to the backup plan. Now let's talk about that quite important detail right there. We issued a directive back in July that required every Board of Elections to have this backup plan in place. To be clear, what that is just the old 3-ring binders, the paper check-in books that had been used in this state for many decades. And so when Franklin County needed to make that decision this morning at 5:30 a.m., they were ready to switch over to that. And again, that was because of the contingency planning that we did working with our county boards of elections to make sure that we had a backup plan in place. This is why we have backup plans. I'm happy to say that The county boards of elections were able to use their CARES Act money to make purchases like this. Initially, some of the boards said, well, now we got to go out and buy all these 3-ring binders and we got to print all these pieces of paper. Well, again, that's why that federal money came in handy. Another incident that I wanted to report in Greene County. In Greene County, we were made aware this morning that there were some voting machines that were not functioning. This was in Bellbrook. In that scenario, the vendors that supply those voting machines were mobilized and were almost immediately on site to work to correct the issue. Those machines are now up and running. Of course, during the time that they were down, the Board of Elections, again, had the backup plan of switching over to paper ballots. That's something that all the boards of elections are prepared to do. And again, something that we directed them to do, to have that backup plan of having paper ballots available. And again, so in this case, that backup plan worked. The machine that was not functioning properly at that time was a Dominion ImageCast X machine. But again, happy to report that those are back up and running. Also want to reiterate something about the 100-foot buffer around polling locations. As you all know, polling locations have a special designation under law for a reason. These are places where voters come to cast their ballots, where poll workers carry out this important civic function. And within 100 feet of that polling location, no kind of political activity is allowed to occur. Of course, voters have been instructed not to wear hats or shirts with their favorite candidate's slogan on it. And when, enthusiastic voters show up wearing a shirt or a hat with their favorite candidate's slogan on it, they'll be dealt with in a professional and friendly manner by the County Board of Elections personnel, the poll workers that are there. And they've been trained to help de-escalate that situation and talk through people and why that is important. But of course, nobody is ever turned away. Something else that that 100-foot barrier designates is that outside of that 100-foot zone, people are free to express their First Amendment protected speech rights. They can pass out flyers and hold signs and that kind of thing. But what will never be tolerated, and you all have heard me say this loud and clear, is any kind of intimidation or obstruction, anything that causes voters to be delayed. That will not be tolerated. And of course, our law enforcement personnel continue to stand ready should somebody try to engage in such illegal activity. But again, happy to report that we're not getting any reports of that. Also want to report a few anecdotes, and these are the things that happen when, again, 56,000 people at 4,000 voting locations all throughout the state are serving, millions of registered voters. In Tuscarawas County early this morning, a poll worker left behind the keys necessary to activate the voting machines. They were back at the Board of Elections. Well, a quick-thinking sheriff's deputy got in his patrol vehicle and ran lights and sirens all the way back to the Board of Elections office to retrieve those keys, and only cost a few minutes' time, and thankfully they were able to get that location up and running. That's, again, the kind of quick thinking and really patriotic and creative service that people render on Election Day. In Hamilton County, we were happy to see photos this morning of a large room where they have their reserve poll workers. These are the folks that are trained and ready to go. They're standing by at the Board of Elections in case they need to be called into service. This was something that we very intentionally did as a state. We told our boards of elections that they needed to not only recruit and train that 37,000 bare minimum, but they needed to go 50% above that. And so if your county board of elections normally relies on 1,000 poll workers, we told you to have 1,500 trained and standing by and ready to go. This is a manifestation of that right there in Hamilton County. And also wanted to point out that there was one county that was one poll worker short this morning. We got a call from them. They needed a poll worker. They didn't have somebody ready to fill those shoes. And so we reached out to a nonprofit that we've been working with called Poll Hero. Poll Hero is a nonprofit group that was started by a group of college students to recruit poll workers nationwide. We formed a great partnership with them early on, and they were responsible for a lot of poll worker recruitment in Ohio. Well, Poll Hero went into their database. They found somebody that had volunteered in that county. They got them on the phone bright and early this morning, got them down to the Board of Elections, quickly trained up and out at the polling location. And as we speak, that poll worker who we were able to locate early this morning is running a polling location or helping to run a polling location here in Ohio. That's awesome news. Also, something that happened in Miami County, and really this is a compliment to their Board of Elections. There was unfortunately a woman who ran her car into the polling location and actually damaged the wall. You can see from photos where the wall is clearly cracked. And thankfully, the woman who ran her car into the polling location was okay. And she was able to cast her ballot actually before leaving the scene. And I'm happy to also report that voting continued at that polling location. The fire department came down and inspected it. They said that the building is safe to continue operating. Of course, it's going to require some repair in the future, but these are the kind of things that happen, again, in a big state like ours. And thankfully, because of the thoughtful work of the Board of Elections there in Miami County, they were able to continue voting there. Everybody kept a cool, calm head. They called in the public safety professionals to look at the building, and again, the woman was okay and able to cast her ballot. So what to expect tonight? You all have heard me talking for some time about the way that election night reporting works in Ohio. And so here's the bottom line. Starting at 7:30 tonight, our boards of elections, actually at 7:31, will immediately begin to tabulate their ballots. And the very first ballots counted in most cases will be those early and absentee ballots. It's intuitive why our boards of elections have been processing those for weeks now. Now, contrast that to some of our neighboring states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, where they weren't even allowed to start cutting open envelopes until today. And in those states, they're going to have a delay because counting all of those ballots is going to take time when they just now started today. But again, thankfully in Ohio, we've been processing absentee ballots since the 6th of October. There's a few key things to point out about that. Because we started processing ballots on the 6th of October, the boards of elections could contact voters that made an error, that forgot their signature. They could send them the form in the mail that they need in order to cure their ballot and start that process of working with voters. And of course, again, all of those ID envelopes have been processed. They verified the identification information, checked the signature against the signature on file, accepted those ballots, and they'll be ready to process right at 7:30. Why this is important to point out is that you'll see results start pretty early in Ohio as those early and absentee ballots get tallied, and then around 8:30, 8:45 at night as the precinct locations start to get their ballots down to the Board of Elections, you'll see those begin processing. Of course, the thing that could lead to a delay tonight is if a Board of Elections receives a large delivery of mail today. If the postal truck shows up today with tens of thousands of ballots on board, then yes, that will cause them to have a little bit longer night. But those are things that we have worked to mitigate, and we've been reminding Ohioans for weeks now to return their absentee ballots. In fact, happy to say that as of last night, the number of outstanding absentee ballots was 243,023. And my hope is that many of those 243,023 Ohioans have returned their absentee ballots today. The reminder is you've got to get it to your Board of Elections before 7:30 tonight. Every Board of Elections now, for the first time ever in a general election, has a secure 24/7 drop box so that you can drop it off there, and those will be emptied promptly at 7:30. So of course, those late arriving absentee ballots could cause a delay, but what will happen later on in the night is that we will report an accurate but incomplete number. Now, let me deconstruct that a little bit for you. What we're going to report is going to be an accurate number, but it's not going to be the final story. And as you all understand, and I've gotten these questions over the last couple of weeks, will we have a final number on election night? Well, the answer is of course not, because we never have a final number on election night. That's just not how election night reporting works. It never has been. But what we will have is an accurate number of everything that's been received so far up until this date. Every absentee vote, every early vote, and every in-person election day vote will be tabulated and reported tonight as part of our unofficial tabulation. One of the other things that we're going to report is the number of outstanding ballots. And that's something for you to watch on our election night reporting website. We're highlighting that for the first time ever. We've reconfigured that website to put that right at the top, the number of outstanding absentee ballots. Again, that 243,000 plus whatever provisional ballots were cast today. There's a reason why that's important. We know that a large number of those absentee ballots will come in over the next 10 days. Of course, boards of elections can receive ballots up until and through the 13th of November, as long as they were postmarked by Monday, November 2nd. And we know that every legally cast ballot must be counted and will be counted. That's how we do it here in Ohio. That's what the law says. And so tonight you're going to get a snapshot in time, but the final number will come weeks later. Now the question is, will tonight's number be conclusive? Well, that'll be up to you to look at that number and make a determination. Again, if your favorite candidate's ahead by 1 million votes and there are yet 200,000 outstanding absentee ballots, I think you can look at that and say that that contest is over. But if your favorite candidate's ahead by 100,000 votes and there are still 200,000 outstanding absentee ballots, well then just by definition, that contest is not going to be over until we have the time to count every single ballot. Again, when the numbers change between the unofficial report on election night and the final certified tally that comes a few weeks later, that's not a sign of something nefarious. In fact, far from it. It's a manifestation of that commitment that you hear every elections official make, that every voice matters and every legally cast ballot must be counted. And so that's exactly what we'll do here in Ohio. Again, want to finish with this. Really just remarkable numbers that we reported yesterday. 3.4 million Ohioans having already cast their ballot really proves something that we've known for a long time. Ohio is a leader when it comes to early and absentee voting. Ohio is a state where we intentionally have made it over the last several years easy to vote. Ohioans are proving that by participating in record numbers. You see the quote from Lincoln over there. That's something that I printed up and we taped up all over the office a few weeks ago. It's one of my favorite. And it was as true then as it is today, that the elections belong to the people and it's their decision. And that's exactly what we're having here in Ohio today, and what we will have in Ohio is a free and fair election where every voice can be heard in an honest contest.